I'm a trans, non-binary, queer, Desi, a Muslim woman.
I'm a queer Muslim woman, Kuwaiti refugee, domestic violence survivor.
I've got multiple nationalities, ethnicities, languages in my head, ways of seeing the world, queer, Muslim. I feel like I'm just full of contradictions.
And what does it mean to you to be queer and Muslim? And I'm not sure if maybe reconcile is the correct word.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you feel that way, how do you go about that? How do you embrace it?
I guess starting with what they mean. If I was being really facetious and cynical, I'd say they mean nothing. They are just facets of who I am. Being queer is not, it doesn't make me special in any way. And it's actually really boring and pedestrian. I saw a play, and in that play was a line that was like, if 10% of all people are queer, and there are like, what, nearly 2 billion Muslims out there, how many queer Muslims are there? Which is a fun, staggering figure. So if I was being facetious today, that would be my answer. It means absolutely nothing. It's just a fact or a thing about myself, same as the fact that I bleached my hair, I have brown skin, I have brown eyes. If I were to be more poetic about it, I'd say that, and I had a friend here last night, we were talking about how when you're queer, when you're trans, it's a really expansive way of seeing the world. And I think if in the kind of Islam I want to practice, that is also an expansiveness. It's looking to be connected to everything in order to be connected to the one. And so I think for me, they're not anything to be reconciled because my understanding of both, they match up beautifully.
I like the term reconcile because I feel that is what I've definitely had to do. Because if I'm being honest about it, I still haven't agreed and don't agree with a lot of the aspects of conservative religion. And this is quite an essential word, I think, in my journey, conservative. Because growing up, I grew up with Sunni Islam, so a very, very strict conservative branch, I think, of Islam. So I came out at university and I thought, this is who I am and I can't stop this anymore. And I feel the religion I've grown up in has limited me in finding out who I am and my identity. And so it's limited my happiness and my self-dignity and my autonomy. So I don't want it anymore. I'm going to push it away. And then I found that what I wanted to do was be in queer spaces. But in doing so, I found myself being whitewashed to quite a high extent because the term queer and the modern gay and queer experience and communities, especially in the UK, are quite whitewashed. And the term queer, even the term trans, they come about in more recent years via Eurocentricity, via white men, observations by white people. And so we find them to be quite white things. And so in order to be in those spaces, you have to be white. You have to express yourself as a white queer person. And to an extent, this helped me because I felt a freedom within it, because all I'd faced before was brown limitation. So white freedom felt like something amazing and incredible. But then it stopped because I'm not white. So I would continue to try and be liberated and free within these spaces, but I felt constricted and suffocated. And I didn't feel like I even knew who I was because I was pretending to be someone else. I think throughout time, I've now reconciled the fact that conservatism in any religion is bad. Religion itself can be anything from money to Abrahamic religion to monotheistic, polytheistic religion. And in fact, they do tend to have the same origins within a lot of the religions and practices. So religion is almost its own term. Spirituality is something else and can actually be achieved without conservative religious practice. And then I reconciled that with the fact that actually conservatism is the cutting off of that beautiful chaos and turning it into something linear, which to me is very anti-queer. So in order to be queer and be non-binary and non-linear and spectrum-based and fluctuating, I then have to almost not reinvent religion, but I have to understand it from the perspectives of indigenous religion, of indigenous Muslims, of communities that don't have that hierarchy that was brought about by, in my mind, quite toxic ideologies of patriarchy, of misogyny, of capitalism. And I find these all became the conservative version of Islam. So I reconcile it in kind of understanding that that's the version of Islam that exists as the mainstream. It's not the only version. And so I can be Muslim and I can be queer because it allows me my culture, it allows me my liberation and my freedom. And it's quite queer of me to re-understand that through a brown perspective than to understand queerness through a white perspective.
I didn't know I was queer until I left my family and started university. I always knew that other people felt differently to me, like when I was a kid and when I was in school, but I just thought I was religious because I'm asexual aromantic, so I wasn't, attracted to other people sexually or romantically. I wasn't getting crushes. I wasn't interested in having sex with anyone. So I just thought it was me being religious. And then I realized, no, that other people are actually experiencing feelings that I'm just not experiencing. And then I wanted to learn more about the LGBT community and just different labels so I can be a better ally. And then I came across the terms asexual and aromantic, and I was like, oh, these describe me. So it was very much by accident, and it was a wonderful accident because I finally realized that there are other people who are like me, because I always just thought I was the weird one, or people bullied me for being, too religious or too prudish. But then I found out there's other people like me. So that was cool. I've had mixed reactions from other Muslims when I talk about being ace. Some people think that I'm just like this super holy person, kind of like a nun or something. The Muslim equivalent of a nun. I think that's how they see it or imagine it. And some people are just like, no, you're sinful and you're a bad Muslim because you have to get married and have lots of babies to be a good Muslim. Even though that has nothing to do with me not experiencing sexual attraction, obviously, because attraction doesn't equal action. So just because I don't experience sexual attraction doesn't mean I'm not interested in marriage or children. But also there shouldn't be an expectation, especially on femme people, that we exist to marry and breed.
My name is Diego Garcia, and I am currently working as a researcher at the University of Nottingham, where I am exploring the lives of queer refugees and asylum seekers who are also religious, or for whom spirituality and faith play an important part in their lives. And before this, I was focusing on the experiences of LGBTIQ+ Muslims, specifically in Indonesia. So I ended up having an opportunity when I was doing my master's degree in Asian studies. I was in Sweden and I met a professor who was an expert on Islamic feminism, and she told me to think about the case of Indonesia where she had connections and experience. And I ended up going to a city on the island of Java where I was supporting a local LGBTIQ+ rights charity. And for me, I came with a notion of what being queer LGBTIQ+ represents that was very normative and very much based on Western kind of like centric frameworks of gender and sexuality. However, when I went to Indonesia, I started to make friendships and to meet people for whom their religion was actually often more important than any other aspect of their identities. And this led me to start considering focusing on this particular topic. Also because I had the realization that this was something that wasn't really part of academic discussions, and when it was only to perpetuate the kind of like idea of being queer and Muslim as being at odds or being against each other, or the fact that you can only be a queer Muslim if you kind of like continuously resist religious values or principles, leading also to the portrayal of these individuals as victims.
I really don't think it's a contradiction, because to believe that being queer and Muslim is a contradiction it relies on the concept that queerness is a choice, that I have to choose one part of who I am in order to embrace another part. I have to choose. I can either be queer or Muslim. I can't be both. But the truth is, both of those things make up who I am. I think it's a common misconception, particularly within the Muslim community, that I've seen a lot of people think queerness is a choice. So that's why they think being queer and Muslim are contradictory.
I see obviously queerphobia among Muslim people, but then there's also a veil of Islamophobia among queer people. And that's not to invalidate that, because there are reasons why there is stigma. How do you sort of navigate that if you've encountered that before?
It's never come up with me. Which is kind of a really beautiful thing. Even in coming out to my family, to my the extended family as well, it's just not been an issue. And I've been really lucky in that way. And so I don't know that I'm the most well equipped to answer that question. And again, I don't know how comparatively rare or not that story is, because there's all of the negativity bias that exists in the media. So we often will hear the more murdery, sad, lost my way type stories as opposed to the joyful ones, because they just don't get the clicks and whatnot. But I've met many people who have wonderful relationships with families and friends for whom this isn't a concern. I've been lucky enough to meet people from the Inclusive Mosque Initiative, from Hidayah, from Iman, who, while there are absolutely stories of strife, difficulty, well, quote, reconciling these two seemingly unreconcilable things, I think personally in my life, because there's been so much joy, it's felt really important for me to continue talking and writing about that. So Would Language is a Queer Thing, as a group we decided we're not doing trauma porn this time. Actually, in the anthology we really wanted to focus on joy, we wanted to focus on love and things like that. And it was the same with a film that I helped co-write called Queer Parivar. The director, the mastermind of the whole thing, Shiva Rajandani, they also wanted a positive queer South Asian love story. One character is a Muslim, one character is a Hindu as well, so it adds that element into it. But what they say is, again, just because you're always seeing us killed off in the media or not having a happy ending, it's really, really important that we get those really over-the-top fairy tales for ourselves as well, to just know that that's possible and, you know, see a world where it's real.
So first, I think what we've got to look at is what is and where does the queerphobia in Islam stem from? And we see that a lot with the Palestinian conflict at the moment. We see the justification of the destruction of Islam and Muslims being used as a vehicle to understand the progress of queerness and the queer community, which obviously is not something that is true. But how do you question that and how do you dissect that? I think, again, you have to look at the origins of it. And I find the origins of queerphobia in Islam, they tend to be patriarchy. They tend to be toxic versions of patriarchy. And they also tend to be this idea of ultimate human. So we have this idea of the ultimate human, and the ultimate human obviously is a very racist, very ableist, very misogynist, because what it does is it places the elite of a society in a hierarchy whereupon they dominate the rest of the hierarchy, and they uphold it by dominating that. And only by achieving their status can you then become the most elite human. Now, in doing that, obviously, they create different versions of humans, and some are lower than others. If queerphobia didn't exist within Islam to the extent that it does, you would have a breaking down of the hierarchies that exist, the dominance that exists. And so the way that I look at it then is to say, well, if I see homophobia being so large within the Muslim community, I tend to see that as something, one, that's seen through a Western lens. So we don't see all the queerness that happens in, for example, Palestine. We don't see all the queerness that happens in Muslim countries, the underground movements, all of the beautiful queerness that exists within those cultures and those communities. All we see is the quote-unquote savagery of strict conservatism and strict conservative religion. So it's a perspective problem on one hand, because the Western media won't show you the beauty of it. And then on the other hand, it's the problem of capitalism and colonialism. But I also don't like to invalidate pain, and I don't think it's useful to invalidate pain. And as someone who faced a lot of harassment and queerphobia and transphobia from Muslims, and specifically Muslim men, I don't want to invalidate the pain of people who feel that. So I think it's actually fine to say, you can be angry at that. You can be angry at masculinity. You can be angry at Muslim masculinity and patriarchal Muslim identities. You don't have to accept everyone immediately simply because they could be better. You just have to be able to be aware that that's not innately because they are Muslim.
Often when I'm giving a presentation at an academic conference, I ask people to think about the last time they saw a Muslim person laughing or smiling on TV, and people always look at me like, oh, like they look very confused. This again is a simplistic question if I have this conversation with someone from Pakistan or from Indonesia, from a Muslim majority country. However, if we are having this conversation in Spain, where I come from, or England, where I am based at the moment, or any other country in the US, where Muslims are a minority population, that's not as simple as it sounds in those other countries I was mentioning, because we often witnessed the portrayal of Muslims as, and especially minorities, such as sexual and gender minorities and women, as victims in need of saving and as oppressed people.
I think the most important piece of advice is to do things in your own time. I think there are these grand narratives of people having these big coming out stories, when the truth is that you come out over and over again in different ways at different times. And sometimes it's not safe to come out, and you should let no one pressure you into doing things before you are truly ready. Toni Morrison has a quote, which I keep coming back to. It's about racism, but I actually think that when it comes to certain kinds of discourse in general, it just feels very relevant. And paraphrasing it, she says that I think the essential function of racism is distraction. It keeps you explaining over and over again your reason for being. And like she goes on to say, like, you know, people say you have no science, so you go prove that you do. Someone says you have no kingdoms, you go dredging up your castles. All of this is a distraction because there will always be one more thing. And I think what I'm getting very tired of as I get older now, and as I'm looking to leave my 20s, inshallah, and all of the rest of it, is people still with the internet, you know. There's so much out there already. And it gets to the point where people can be really lazy. Like, the questions you've asked me are beautiful, and I was really happy when you sent them through. I've definitely also been in interviews before where it's like, what does it mean to you to be a queer Muslim? And it's like, are you serious? What does it mean to you? Like, you know, I'm so much more interested as a non-queer Muslim what you think being a queer Muslim means, because that's where all of these problems stem from in my mind. It's not my conception of what it means to be me. It's your conception of what it means to be me that you put out there and that you force me to internalize because it's a mainstream view. If Allah made me this way, if I'm having my own direct dialogue with Allah, if I'm going through my life and being a good person, you don't know if I pray 5 times a day. You don't know what's in my heart. You don't know what's in my soul or what's in my path. If you don't know any of these things about me, but you hear that one element of, oh, I'm queer, and then you make all of these judgments, it's not your place to judge because you're not God. I don't answer to you.
I don't believe there to be a time limit on accepting any identity that you may have, and you feel that instead of having identities despite yourself, you have identities that then help fuel your growth, and your growth can just be staying still, reaching a point that you can, you can stay still, reaching a point in which you can be comfortable, maybe reaching a point in which you feel confidence in yourself, that you can question items and ideologies and concepts.
Don't change yourself into who others expect you to be. And instead of conforming to what other people expect from you, find people who respect and love you and accept you as you truly are. Find your queer Muslim community, find your allies. I think the internet is an amazing space for that. I didn't know there was a huge queer Muslim community until I came online. I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. I think as well, I always recommend people to relearn Islam for themselves, not just what we've been taught. There are a lot of amazing organizations for queer Muslims that people can join, and just to find people who are like you.